Some good souls here in the room that, despite my reputation, still came for the program. And so I thought we could do is either people who are watching on StreamYard, I think it's called, or the devotees here in Tallahassee, if you have any questions, we could do that. Does anyone have any questions about Krishna consciousness, philosophy, practice, attitudes? Anything? Well,
everyone expects to hear you.
Okay, well, they will anyway. So, so why don't you present a topic and we'll speak on that. Okay, how about what the heck are we doing here? So, I mean, these are very basic things. This world, of course, can be very confusing and irrational, deadly. Our position in this world is very precarious. And so, as Prabhupada explained, a thoughtful person, in other words, a person who thinks, is going to ask, who am I? What am I doing here? Where am I? For example, now with the Webb telescope, we know that, at least if you are satisfied with current astronomical theory, and of course, if we come back 100 years, they'll probably have very different views on that. I attended an astronomy conference, actually at our Bhaktivedanta Institute, just a couple days ago, and apparently the physical world as we know it, the physical world that we can perceive through our senses, matter, and also through our extended senses, through telescopes or, by all the means that we perceive matter. The perceptible physical world is about 5% of the universe. That's the current number, 5%. So that means 95% of what's in the universe, we don't know what it is. 95% of the universe. So we don't really know where we are. And we know some things. We know, for example, that there's a piece of land called Florida, and in it there's a city called Tallahassee. So obviously the things that we think we know, in a sense, we do know. We do know that we were born in certain families, that we have names, that we have bodies, that we do certain things every day. So I'm not presenting a radical skepticism where you don't know anything. And basically the things that we think we know, a sober person, a person who's not just a narcissist or a know-it-all, but a normal person who is not like absurdly proud, knows certain things, and those things are basically true. However, because everything in this world is temporary, it's not an ultimate truth. For example, it's true that Tallahassee is the capital of Florida. It's not true that Tallahassee was always the capital of Florida, or always will be, or that Florida will always exist. We know our sun is eventually, the battery is going to run out in our sun, and the whole solar system will collapse. And so everything is temporary, as the Buddhists always remind us. So everything is temporary in this world. So you can say, I'm in Tallahassee, so we know what that means, but what does it ultimately mean? Because if Florida and Tallahassee or the earth are just temporary, does anything always exist? Or they say matter is conserved or energy is conserved. So if you knew everything, what would you know? What would you say about where you are right now? What would you say about yourself if you knew everything? It's an interesting question, I think. And fortunately, there is someone that does know everything, God or Krishna. So, we can ask him. So the universe actually comes with a user's manual. which is the Bhagavad Gita. And so, like they say, if everything else fails, read the instructions. And so we learn in Bhagavad Gita who we really are, what this world really is. I mean, first of all, someone thinks, oh no, I am the body, like I'm male or female, or I'm this age or that size. That is actually philosophically absurd. Philosophically absurd. It's not absurd because it contradicts what Hare Krishna say. It's absurd philosophically because, I mean, going back to say to the French philosopher Descartes, who engaged in this sort of elaborate thought experiment, which he wrote down in a book called his Meditations. And so what he did, it's a very famous book in philosophy. He said that, what if I doubt everything that I think I know? What if I say, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't really know that. Is there anything that I cannot doubt, because it would be absurd to doubt it? And if I doubted it, I would be acting in a foolishly irrational way. Is there anything I can't doubt? And he concluded, yes, there is one thing I can't doubt. And that is,
I exist.
yes, exactly, I exist, sum, which in Spanish is soy, from the Latin, not to be confused with the sauce. So I think, therefore I exist, I am. So you can't doubt. Now, so if we just go along with Descartes for a while, because, I mean, obviously, if you didn't exist, you couldn't be thinking about whether you exist or not. And if you didn't exist, you couldn't be doubting that you exist. So if we just go with that for now and say that the thing we know more powerfully than anything else is our own existence. Interestingly, at the same time that Descartes was doing his thing, there was another famous, you could say, scholar or sort of early scientist named Bacon, Francis Bacon, who kind of did the opposite of Descartes. Descartes said, if you want to find ultimate certainty, you have to look within, which is more like yoga. And Bacon was one of the sort of the people that revived the scientific method, he was a leader in what some people call the scientific revolution of the 1600s and early 1700s. And Bacon said that we can find certainty by systematically studying the external world. So these were two approaches. But of course, when we study the external world, there are problems. If you study the history of science, what you find is that sometimes for centuries, there is a broad consensus among scientists that something is the case, that something is a fact. And then they find out, whoops, I guess it wasn't. To give one example, going back almost a couple thousand years ago, there was after Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, he built a city there called Alexandria, and it became a center of culture. It had in its time one of the greatest libraries in the world, and so in Alexandria there was a scientist, you could say, an astronomer named Ptolemy, who was Greek, because the Greeks were ruling Egypt at that point after Alexander. So he was into astronomy, and he came up with a system to calculate positions of the planets. And the system was brilliant, and it was very efficient. They needed one reason they wanted to calculate these things is because astrology was very popular, and you can't do precise astrology unless you have good astronomy, obviously. So anyway, the system worked. Everyone accepted it. It was taught in all the universities in Europe once they had universities. It was about 1,000 years ago. And there's just one little problem. He was wrong. He talked about epicycles, like planets go, and as planets revolve around the sun, they also go in their own little circles. And it was ingenious and it worked. but due to a phenomenon called precession, which is that it's like, the zodiac moves around the night sky approximately once every year. The problem is it's not exactly once every year. That's why in the lunar calendar used in India and the Jewish calendar, some of the older calendars, lunar calendars, every so often you add a little month, which is a pretty big correction. And you could say, why do these ancient civilizations use a lunar calendar, even though the solar calendar, the correction is much less? It's just every leap year you add one day. I think one reason they were inclined toward a lunar calendar is because most of the time the moon comes out at night and you can see all the stars. And so if you're doing general astronomy, it's practical to observe base things on the moon, which also allows you to connect it to all the stars. But anyway, so Ptolemy, his system was brilliant, it was ingenious, it worked until it didn't work. And so they're trying to figure out, like, why didn't it work? And so the Vatican requested some astronomers to try to figure this out, because we're not able to calculate the holy days like we do in our devotee calendars. And so one of these people was very smart and actually inspired by religion, not atheism, kind of figured it out. That person was Copernicus. Copernico, in some languages, Copernicus. And he said, well, actually, don't want to really disturb everyone, but the earth goes around the sun. That actually it's a heliocentric model, not a geocentric model. It's interesting the way he came up with this. He was actually inspired by religion, because back then all the great scientists were religious. The idea that you have to be at least methodologically atheistic to do science is one of the more stupid ideas in the last few centuries. And actually, the truth is exactly the opposite. Copernicus was as many intellectual Christians were, he was a Platonist. He was really into Plato. And in Plato, the sun often is a symbol of God, as it is in our literature, like in the Gayatri Mantra. So Copernicus thought, well, Plato, who was very wise, he thought that the sun sort of stands for God, source of light, source of knowledge, because without light you can't see anything. And so he thought, well, maybe if the sun symbolizes God, why not put the sun in the center? And so even Galileo went on trial for one simple reason, not because he had a heliocentric model. Galileo went on trial because he was unbelievably obnoxious. He was actually friends with the Pope. This is real history, you can look it up. He was friends with the Pope. The Pope was actually enthusiastic about his work. And then Galileo wrote a book, which was sort of typical of that time, where it's sort of a dialogue between many people. Probably the influence of Plato, because in Platonic dialogues, most Platonic dialogues are conversations between a group of interlocutors, to use the academic word. And so he wrote a book in which there's these various people discussing astronomy, and one of the persons is like a real clown, a doofus, just really foolish, and that was the Pope. So here the Pope was kind of a friend of his, encouraging him. Then he writes a book ridiculing the Pope, which you couldn't really do back then. But of course, scientists, they never tire of saying this shows how religion is dangerous. It's against science. It's against knowledge. So atheism is the only way to be a good scientist. So this is all nonsense. But then again, there's a lot of nonsense that goes on in universities. There's actually some knowledge, but it's balanced by a lot of nonsense. So anyway, so
ouch.
What's that?
Ouch.
Oh no, you're not one of the bad guys. You're one of the infiltrators. So when I was at Harvard, actually, I remember I sit in classes and the teachers would kind of, make fun of Vedic culture. I just thought, I'll have the last laugh because I'm getting all this knowledge and then I can use it to present Krishna consciousness. So anyway, so if you look at the universe, the Webb telescope, of course, the Webb telescope is also based on certain assumptions. For example, the assumption that, unprovable assumptions, by the way, scientifically unprovable, that the laws of nature operate uniformly all over the universe. Now, how do we know that? Like, let's say, for example, astronomy detects a galaxy, and which is, say, 1 billion light years away, which is take many tanks of gas, right? So let's say a galaxy is 1 billion miles away. So as we know, I mean, this is, everyone knows this, that when we look through the telescope, we're actually looking into the very, very remote past. We have no idea what's actually out there now. Maybe some big cosmic dragon swallowed those galaxies. Very unlikely, but I mean, technically, you can't prove it's not the case. So, and then again, the problem that 95% of the universe is, can't be detected. And they sort of come to this conclusion because if you take gravitational force, I mean, when you see objects move, they move in relation to other objects. It's Newton's laws of motion that something, inertia, something that's in motion will remain in motion in the same way, the same speed, unless something else acts upon it. And so when you see velocities and movements or, turning in certain directions, which are not what an object would do if nothing was acting upon it, then they conclude, well, something is acting upon it, but we can't see it. But in any case, if you consider how big everything is, and here we are in Tallahassee, and of course we will live out our lives and we'll be gone, and eventually the earth will be kind of wrapped up, put back in the box, and the universe will be wrapped up. Krishna describes these things in the Bhagavad Gita. Universes come and go. And so when you ask the question, who am I? Where am I ultimately? Where am I really? I mean, imagine someone, for example, imagine if someone here knew that I'm in this room, but didn't know the room is in a house. Or someone knew I'm in this house, but didn't know I'm in a neighborhood. Or I'm in a neighborhood, but they don't know that I'm in a city, or in a county, or a state, or a country, and a continent. So if someone knew, let's say they were in this house, but had no idea this house is on a street, and the street's in a city, which is in a county, which is in a state, which is on a continent, because they didn't know any of that, you wouldn't call that person like super bright. It's not like a supernova human being just because they know they're in a house. And that's kind of the position of the modern world. We know something about where we are, but mostly we don't know. Another problem, the empiric method, which is very good, it actually got me here, right? My GPS, that's not a product of metaphysical prayers, it's a product of science, applied science. And so science is good, but if you think of the empiric method, it's based on, ask him if he's willing to take a survey after my class. So you cannot perform an empirical experiment unless you can control something. We've all seen the sci-fi things like, I think it was Spider-Man 2 or something, or maybe Spider-Man 1. It's like there's some mad scientist. It's funny because scientists are sometimes seen as saving the world, sometimes seen as destroying the world. So the mad scientist is like a trope. It's a standard piece, in Hollywood drama. So imagine, scientist, the experiment goes wrong, the laboratory blows up, everyone's running for cover, and and running in front. The first to escape, of course, will be Tom Cruise. Or what's his name?
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
No, 007. Bond. James Bond. Yeah. So in other words, so to perform science, you have to control things. That's what lab conditions are. You have complete control. There's not some weird gas or molecule that just suddenly bursts into your laboratory. You have to know what's there, and you have to know that I'm subjecting this object A to this stimulus or to this interaction B, and you have to know. And you can't have wild cards. You can't have things that you don't know about. And even, let's say, if you're just doing observational science, like let's say you're just doing astronomy, but let's say you have a telescope and you're an astronomer, it has to be the case that you have reliable, regular access to the object. So if you want, let's say you're looking at a galaxy, and you know that, let's say I can get the best shot, or that I can, it's going to be in this part of the sky, and so on. So to have guaranteed access is a type of control. For example, you can't just walk into somebody else's house and say, I'm going to observe you, because you may end up in jail. You probably will end up in jail, or in a psychiatric clinic. So even to have guaranteed access to observe something is a form of control. Now, the problem with that is that by its own ground rules, by its own methodological principles, empirical science can never study anything beyond our control. And so therefore these clowns, some of them, actually most scientists believe in some kind of supernatural thing, the latest study shows, but the atheists, who are just complete clowns, they say that, well, we can prove there's no God because it doesn't turn up empirically. That is about as intelligent as saying that a thermometer is a scientific instrument, and I set out with a thermometer to study the world, and I found out there's actually nothing out there except temperature. That would be pretty idiotic, wouldn't it? And the answer, no, but it's a scientific instrument. So in order to do science, you have to not only have a reliable instrument, you have to have a rational methodology. So trying to understand things that are more powerful than us through a method that requires that we control that more powerful thing is grossly irrational. It's not scientific, it's stupid. And so actually, if you study the nature of experiment design, first of all, you can't search for anything unless you think you know something about it. Because if I say to you, let's say I said that the first person that brings me a Frigertoff, I will give $1 million to. And someone says, what's a Frigertoff? And I say, well, I'm not going to tell you anything about it. Like, is it a physical object? I won't say. Is it an idea? Is it a mental object? I won't say. You cannot search for something unless you either know something about it or you believe you know something about it. Like if you lost your car keys, you're not going to go looking up in the top of trees unless you think some little delinquent threw your car keys up in a tree or something. So for example, I remember when I was at UCLA doing undergraduate work many years ago, I took an astronomy class because it was a science requirement, so I thought that would be the least painful. So I took an astronomy class, and I remember there were these prominent astronomers then at UCLA who were searching for brown dwarfs. Brown dwarfs are sort of celestial bodies that are in the process of becoming stars but don't make it. Right? It's like trying out for a soccer team and you get cut from the roster. So they're just kind of wannabe stars that don't make the team. So these are brown dwarfs, and they're sort of, it's almost like some kind of Christian hell where you're condemned to just wander through the universe as a brown dwarf. Anyway, so I remember there was one astronomer at UCLA, I don't remember his name, was one of the lead scientists in the search for brown dwarfs. And as part of the class, we watched a video where he was kind of like, sounded like, almost like I don't mean to say like a car salesman, but I just remember he was saying, we know they're out there, and we know we're going to find them, and he did find them. But the point I wanted to make is when they were searching for brown dwarfs, they thought they knew something about it. They thought that based on what we know in astronomy, there should be brown dwarfs. And if there are, this is what they would probably be like, and this is how we could detect them. So they designed experiments based on what they thought they knew about it. So even if you're searching for God, what we think we know about God is that God is infinitely greater than us. If you don't believe that, you're searching for someone else and just sticking on the name God. I might add that atheism is philosophical nonsense in one sense, because if there is no God, no one knows everything. And if no one knows everything, no one knows that there's a God. It's just bad philosophy. Of course, the typical way they try to argue there's no God is that, well, if God is omniscient, if he knows everything, he knows that there's injustice and suffering in this world. If God is all good, omnibenevolent, then he wants to stop the suffering. If God is all powerful, omnipotent, he can stop the suffering, but the suffering doesn't stop. Hence, there cannot be a triple O God, omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipotent. And this is like their prize argument. Unfortunately, it's a bad argument for the following reason. That, let's say you're a parent, you have a child. Well, you are parents, you do have a child. So let's say, for example, you have to take the child to get some kind of medical treatment. It's routine. I'm not, wishing a disease on your child. So let's say the child just has to get, for example, like a vaccination or something, even though it's a terrible international conspiracy to destroy the earth. I was kidding. So let's say you're taking your child to get a vaccination. So and let's say it hurts a little bit. I mean, not a lot, but it's it's unpleasant. Child gets a little shot. I remember when I was about 5 years old, my father took me and my older brother to this little clinic in Los Angeles because we had to get some kind of shot or something. And I remember my brother went first, and they took him into one of the rooms, and he was about 6.5. And I remember they pulled his pants down, and I saw the needle come out, and I thought, I am so out of here. And so I just I turned around, I just started running down the sidewalk. I remember my father caught up with me, which wasn't very difficult. So I remember he was a very good father. He put me on his shoulder. He carried me back in. So parents knowingly subject their children to sometimes pain and discomfort. It could be a dentist. Why? Out of love. Because that discomfort or that pain prevents a much greater evil. And so therefore, in the case of God, if we want to be serious philosophers, we have to ask, is there a much greater evil which is being prevented by allowing someone to suffer? And of course, the answer is yes. For one thing, it preserves our free will. Because if you don't have free will, it's like, what does it even mean to live without free will? You'd just be like some kind of camera or something scanning things. I mean, you wouldn't even be a person. So if you have free will, but you can't exercise it, you don't really have free will. So what Krishna does is he takes souls, because just like parents may punish the children, give them a little pain or something, but good parents will never injure their children. You cause a little pain, but you'll never actually injure the child. God, Krishna, God never injures anyone. He takes souls who have some karma and he puts them in virtual reality machines. And then all kinds of things happen to the virtual reality machines, and the poor fool who's inside, thinks it's happening to me. I remember, for example, one time I went to Universal Studios long ago, obviously for completely Krishna conscious purposes. And they had, because I'm from Southern California, so they had this sort of space ride, and so everyone got on this ride. It was like a capsule, and it's all glass around. It's not really glass. It's not, they have, and so you take off, and then at a certain point you're crashing into the surface of some planet, and everyone on the ride, adults. I mean, people that weren't, they looked like normal, educated adults. Everyone's like ducking for cover, and even though they know it's Universal Studios, but it's really a virtual reality experience. So no one is ever injured. Souls are never actually injured, and they're given the chance to experience the fair consequences of what they do. It's like that. There's a famous song by Bob Dylan. It begins, "Once upon a time, how does it feel?" Like it's, how does it feel? And so, like a Rolling Stone. So, with karma, now the Christians, there are philosophers who, in other ways, are very good philosophers, but who are Christians who are also trying to defend that there can be a God despite the suffering in this world. Now, they have a big problem, which I think prevents them from really philosophically dealing with the issue. And that is, for some unfortunate reason, they came up with this, I would frankly say, bad philosophy that you only get one life. I mean, we all know how difficult it is to really change. People make New Year's resolutions, and it's kind of farcical, right? Has anyone ever kept a New Year's resolution? So, I mean, to actually change, to go from a position of being bestial or demonic and to come all the way to being a pure devotee, it takes time, and you can't squeeze all that into one life. Therefore, there's karma, there's samsara. So, from the side of these sort of Middle Eastern religions, I can't think of any good reason to limit us to one life. There's no good reason to do that. And so if you think that this is our first life, you really cannot satisfactorily deal with the fact that there is a God and there's so much injustice and suffering in the world. Now, the best these Christian philosophers could come up with, and they're good philosophers, but they're sort of hobbled by trying to defend what is ultimately a very problematic theology. And so what they say is they touch on the point of, well, it would be a greater evil. God allows some evil to prevent a greater evil, the greater evil being that we lose our free will. But what they can't do, because they don't know karma, is say that, let's say, here's a person with bad intent, a person who intends to do something bad, like to harm an innocent person. And so the Christian philosophers argue, well, if God didn't allow that person to carry out their ill intent, then there would be a greater evil, namely of depriving that person of free will. However, in reality, the way the creation really is, as explained in Bhagavad Gita, that person's free will can be preserved. The person can actually carry out an immoral act, and yet the act is carried out upon a person who had some bad karma to pay. And therefore, there is no innocent victim. Now, that should not be misunderstood to indicate that you can just go down the street shooting people because it must have been their karma. I'm just doing God's work on earth. That, because you cannot take the law into your own hands. You cannot take the law into your own hands. It's just like, let's say someone is condemned to death by the state. You can't break into the prison and shoot that person. Then you are guilty of murder, even though that person was liable to be executed. So, anyway, go on and on and on. But Krishna consciousness, we're trying to understand God. The question should be, let's say, experiment design. when in the real world you're trying to understand something greater than yourself, what do you actually do? For example, let's say you're trying to get into a prestigious university. And let's say they have many more applicants than they have places, which is true especially often in graduate school. So therefore, you want access to that knowledge, you want access to that institution, you have to please them. You know, you read a book like Graduate Applications for Dummies, or, let's say you're applying for a job interviews for dummies or whatever. And basically you have to go in there and convince them that, it'd be the greatest thing in the world for them to accept you because you are their dream candidate. Right? I mean, that's how you do it. So when you're trying to persuade someone or gain the favor of someone much greater than you, it turns out you have to do bhakti. I'm going to be so devoted to this company, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I would actually give both my kidneys, for this company and so on. So therefore, trying to understand someone infinitely greater than ourselves, namely God, by devotion turns out to be a thoroughly rational, scientific way of understanding God. It is a rational experiment design. Because just like these scientists, they didn't know for sure that brown dwarfs exist, but they thought if they do exist, they'll probably be like this. Similarly, you can say, I don't know if God exists, but if God does exist, the God I'm looking for is infinitely great. And therefore, I have to try to please that person, and if that person exists, then the whole thing will work. So it's very simple, actually. So Krishna consciousness is a spiritual science, but it's a metaphysical science. It's a science to discover and understand things greater than you, just like empirical science is a science to understand things that are less than you, like dead matter. And so it's not that empirical science is more scientific, it's just that they aim much lower. And so just like we foolishly say, well, how can we discover, let's say, hang on, it'll be over soon, then you get to eat or something or play. Anyway, maybe I'll stop there. So any questions? So I guess the conclusion is that Krishna consciousness is a spiritual science. And even from the point of view of empirical science, most of the greatest scientists in history were actually religious. You can study that, including Aryabhatta, great astronomer and trigonometer and mathematician, who's the one that figured out how long ago Krishna appeared through archaeoastronomy. So, any questions? Yes.
Is that one of the reasons you started the Bhaktivedanta Institute?
Yeah. Prabhupada originally founded it, and okay, I'll say a word on that. And now it's flourishing, actually. More and more and more devotee scholars with PhDs or master degrees are joining us, and we have astronomers, we have biologists, philosophers, historians. It really is kind of like the academic center of ISKCON. And it's important because Prabhupada paid a lot of attention to his socio-historical factors. Prabhupada, sort of like he was operating on the basis of Krishna's statement, yajadacharati shestas. Whatever the leading person does, tattariv etaro jana, then the common people will follow. So Prabhupada wanted to attract intelligent people, and specifically, he wanted to reconstitute a Brahmana class in society. Because Prabhupada always said, modern society is a headless body. But the corollary of that, hey, you'll really like this one. The corollary of that, if the world's a headless body, then ISKCON is a disembodied head. like in science fiction, some head floating around the universe. And so if the body and the head get separated, who's going to figure out how to put them together? The body has no consciousness. It's the brain that has to figure out. We are supposed to figure out how to connect ourselves to the social body. And that's why I started Krishna West. Not only because, I wanted to disturb a lot of people for my own fun. That wasn't the only reason. But actually, we have to be scientific. The laws of nature, to say that one is free of karma by bhakti yoga doesn't mean you're free of the laws of nature. For example, if a karmi, a jnani, a yogi, a dhyani, and a bhakta all fall off a cliff, they will actually all fall exactly at the same velocity according to the laws of physics. And so even though you're a devotee, there are laws of nature. There are laws which sort of govern or explain social interaction, how people can be convinced. You can call it marketing if you like. And there's a science of that, how to persuade people, how to make people comfortable, how to explain things to people. And so I began Krishna West because I take that seriously. Not just blind faith. Prabhupada said that religion without philosophy is just sentimental or fanatical. What is our actual culture? What does Vaishnava history actually tell us? Is there actually such a thing as Vaishnava dress? Is it mentioned in Shastra? Is it not mentioned in Shastra? And what does the Bhagavatam say about how we should dress? Which I've actually studied. As a sannyasi, I have 3 options, I think. One is streaking, don't wear anything, which is not a good option nowadays. Second option is deerskin, hopefully with Velcro. And the third option is tree bark, and this is what the Bhagavatam says, and that's our main Shastra. But Lord Chaitanya forbid his followers to wear deerskin. Why? Because it's a detail. Rupa Goswami, chapter 6, Nectar of Devotion. They're basic principles you can't change. They're details which are flexible, time and place. Bhishma is glorified in the Bhagavatam as Desha Kala Vibhagavit, one who knew the Desha Kala Vibhaga, the differences of time and space. Actually, space and time. Country and time. And when Narada Muni instructed Dhruva, he said, you have to worship Krishna Desha Kala Vibhagavit. You have to understand what is appropriate in the country, in the time you're living in. And this is something which is not studied very much. We don't do marketing because we have prophecies on our side. But my point is that we should, if a devotee opens a restaurant, he'll be extremely attentive to public taste. Why? Because there's money involved. But if we go out on the street to chant, there's no money involved, so, who cares what they think? They're just gonna, if you don't like what we're doing, tell it to Yamaraj. So my point is that, and Prabhupada, read Prabhupada's purport to 4.854, and you'll see what Prabhupada says about it. In many other places. So we have to be spiritual scientists, and we have to carefully study the place we're in and find ways to actually make people comfortable so that they can take to Krishna consciousness. Anyway, stop there. This poor child's been tortured long enough.
Yeah, it's a bit.
So thank you. And for those of you, actually, maybe I could just look real quick, see if anyone, what people wrote in. I don't see any questions yet. No questions. So thank you all for watching online. Thank you all.
One question.
Okay, one last question. Go ahead.
It is not actually the thing that we are discussing with I follow Mahabharata very closely, and Karna kind of really okay. Karna really fascinates me. I guess that's the word. What is the lesson that we can learn from Karna's life? What would you say?
First of all, don't cheat on your college application. When he approached Parashara.
Parshuram.
Huh? Yeah,
Parshuram.
yeah, Parashuram. Yeah, of course, Parashuram. So Karna had character flaw. He's not just a victim. I mean, look at the real history. Yes, Kunti had to give him up because she was just an adolescent. I mean, she was going to have a nervous breakdown if she kept him. And he actually grew up with very loving parents. In fact, if you read Mahabharata carefully, the unabridged edition, not just Amar Chitra Katha, or the Bollywood versions, then Karna's father was, what was his name? Oh my God.
Adirat.
Adirata.
He was the
Adirata.
Ratha, Sarthi of Dhritarashtra.
Yeah, he was a faithful servant of Dhritarashtra, and he settled in what is now sort of East India, near where West Bengal meets Magad, which is called my God, I can't believe the name of the state. What? No.
He said
Patna. Patna is
Magad.
what?
Magad. That is Magad. That was the modern.
I know, but what's it called now?
It's called Patna.
No, that's the capital, the state.
Bihar.
Bihar, yeah, of course, Bihar. So he was given a nice position. He had a very loving mother. His name was Radha. His mother was very loving. He had a good father. And if you look in the Mahabharata, because, I mean, in India, they tend to get a lot of things wrong about the Mahabharata because they don't read the original text. For example, the first time in the Mahabharata that Karna meets the Pandavas is at the graduation ceremony for Drona's military college. And back then, just like today, when a student graduates, it's a big thing for the family, right? The whole family comes, everyone takes pictures, it's a celebration. You celebrate the graduation of someone in your family. That's what it was like. In fact, for the graduation ceremony, for the military college, they actually built a special arena. So it was a very big festive event. Here you have the Pandavas who have lost their father. Two of them lost their mother. And so Karna sort of bursts into the stadium, and it's very clear that he's envious of Arjuna. There's no mention anywhere that Arjuna ever did anything against Karna. He just bursts in and he starts insulting Arjuna and saying whatever he can do, I can do. Who's this punk Arjuna? And he wants to fight him. And that's when Bhima says, well, who are your parents? Because what would you do if someone bursts, let's say your brother, is at his graduation ceremony and suddenly someone just bursts in and wants to kill your brother. And what are you going to do? You're going to do whatever you have to do. And that's Karna. Gratuitous, no reason. And of course, we know that we know that he had Kshatriya abilities and he's got, so maybe he didn't have the opportunity. The upward mobility he kind of was qualified for. But look at the Pandavas in comparison. When the Pandavas were exiled to the forest, what did they do? Go around lying to people to get weapons? No. They went to holy places. They just accepted it as Krishna's arrangement. So both Pandavas and Karna, in a sense, were derived of opportunities at certain stages in their life, but they responded in very different ways. Karna lied to Parashuram. He was envious of Arjuna for no stated reason. And then, because Duryodhana befriended him for the most cynical reasons, because he saw that Karna was really, and plus, Karna's father was friends of his father. So he must have known who Karna was. He knew who Karna was. He knew he was a great warrior. As we know, he's Surya Putra. born to the sun. And so,
In that Rangbhumi, perhaps Karna also displayed some of his archery. That is why maybe Duryodhan thought that he could be a good
yes.
rival to Arjun.
Yeah, but the great archers, it was kind of like not a huge community. There weren't like thousands of world-class archers, and they knew each other. It's just like saying professional boxing. Everyone knows who the great boxers are in all the different countries. And yes, and Karna displayed his skill. But the point here is that Karna was then, made because Bhima said he can't compete because he's not royal, doesn't have royal blood. So Duryodhana said, no problem, anointed him, Abhishek with a little water, and said, I give you Anga, which is very interesting because Anga is where he grew up. That was his father's kingdom, Anga. And of course, there's no record that he ever actually went there. It's just like, when you had these French monarchs, like Louis XIV or XV or XVI at Versailles, so all the nobles were at court where you could kind of keep a watch on them, and hardly any nobles ever actually went to their principalities or their fiefdoms. And so, but Duryodhana was clearly a bad person. And yet Karna dedicates his life to a bad person. Man is known by the company he keeps. Karna knows he's a bad person because, and so ironically, if you serve a bad person just because that bad person gave you something, that's called Shudra. That's what a Shudra does. If you give him something, employ him, give him stuff, a position or money or whatever, he becomes your faithful servant like a dog. That's a Shudra position. And we know that Karna knew that Duryodhana was a bad person because even, for example, in the Pandavas, everyone thought they were killed in the Lak Griha. Everyone thought they were killed. Yeah, my Bengali pronunciation slipped in. So everyone thought they were killed, and then the Pandavas reappear after winning Draupadi. Because when they won Draupadi, they actually had an army. The Panchalas. The Panchalas were one of the greatest armies in Bharata. So because they now had an army on their side, they married into a powerful kingdom. They came out of hiding. And so the Kurus were having these like frantic emergency meetings. Like, what do we do with this? Because we tried to kill them and we missed. And then we exiled them. And so they're going to want vengeance, and everyone knew the power of the Pandavas, and Krishna is their friend. So there was kind of like a type of panic in Hastinapur. And so it's interesting, and eventually, of course, they divided the kingdom. But before that, if you read the Sanskrit text, Duryodhana is just coming up with one sneaky, dirty little trick after another. Like, we'll poison them. We'll turn the Pandavas against each other. It's just all these dirty little tricks. And finally, even Karna couldn't take it. And so there's these verses in the Sanskrit where Karna tells Duryodhana, knock it off. And he keeps telling him Vikrama, which means, like Vikramaditya. So the verb, Vikrama, means like step out. Take action, be bold. Don't be like a little weasel with all these tricks.
Well, Karna always wanted him to wage war against the Pandavas.
Yes, but why? Why would you? The Pandavas are great devotees of Krishna. Why would you want to defeat the Pandavas? And so, anyway, so Karna, Madhvacharya, Madhvacharya is from southwest India. Madhvacharya. From Madhvacharya. He wrote a book on the Mahabharata called Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya, ascertaining the meaning of the Mahabharata, in which he says that most of the original verses have been lost. And many of the verses that are there are a corruption. We have the Bhagavatam, which actually corrects the Mahabharata in many ways. Anyway, that's a whole topic, too much for now, but we have to go, and But there are many anomalies in the story.
But I think Karna had one, very big complaint against Drone, that when he turned up in Drone's ashram, that he wanted archery training from him. Drone said that since you are a Sud Putra, you will not get my training. So that is perhaps the reason why Karna was mostly against Drone, and since Arjuna was
He had a rivalry with Dronacharya, but I mean, if there's
This is a long debate. I mean, it was like
no, but I think we have to look at the facts. The facts are that, I mean, Krishna personally. I mean, look at when Krishna told Arjun, "You should do this." Arjun did it. When Krishna told Karna what to do, he refused it. God is standing right in front of him, telling him what to do, and he refuses. I'm not saying Karna is evil, but there were, he had problems. He had problems. And I think, anyway, I could tell you many other things, but
yeah. I mean, this can be a whole different conversation. For the
yeah,
whole
yeah.
day.
And your son is going to go crazy. Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll stop here. Thank you all very much. And thank you, everybody that's listening. We'll go off the air now. Let's see, how do I just...